So let's go again. And हमारे साथ जवाद रजा मौजूद हैं जो कि SVP हैं, हेड ऑफ AI एंड बिग डेटा मीज़ान बैंक के. एंड मैं बहुत ज़्यादा एक्साइटेड हूँ बिकॉज ही इज जस्ट लाइक मी, फेलो चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट एंड कमिंग फ्रॉम द डोमेन बेस्ड बैकग्राउंड. तो अब आप लोगों को वो टॉपिक सुनने को मिलेगा कि आइडेंटिफाइंग द क्वालिफाइड बिजनेस प्रॉब्लम्स, मतलब बिजनेस ओनर कैसे सोचता है जब मशीन लर्निंग का प्रॉब्लम उसको पिच किया जाता है. जब आप मशीन लर्निंग का कोई बताते हैं कि सर हम ये वाली चीज ML से कर सकते हैं, तो वो कैसे सोचता है, हाउ दे थिंक, जवाब आपको बहुत क्लियरली बताएंगे. तो ओवर टू यू, थैंक यू फॉर जॉइनिंग अस.
Thank you, Mesam. I believe I want to keep this very interactive. So, agar aap saath rahenge, so I want whoever, if I ask questions, yeah, first 2, 3, agar koi comments are there, please rally them back to me. I think I'll appreciate that. And also, if you can go back or put my slides on, there's only a couple of slides that I have for the session. I believe I have 30 minutes, so the topic is quite vast and its array of what how qualified business problem needs to come in. Let me start by just introducing myself. As said, I'm a SVP data analytics, AI, and big data in Meezan Bank. Just wanted to clarify again, you guys can hear me, right? Because I'm not getting any sort of feedback.
जवाब हम आपको सुन सकते हैं और लोगों के चैट के अंदर कमेंट्स आ रहे हैं.
Okay, great. So the topic that was given to me was quite interesting, which was how do you qualify business problems for machine learning? Before that, let me introduce myself. Like I said, I've worked as a consultant. I've worked as a strategist. I've worked in investment banking, and then by profession, I'm a chartered accountant and a CPA. I work across the globe in Canada, America, Europe, London, with assets around the globe. So I kind of understand what's going on in terms of how problems get solved in the corporate world. Now, having given my background, which is quite brief here, I'm quite happy that you didn't ask me to identify successful business problems for machine learning, because finding success in machine learning is the biggest problem. So I'm glad we're sticking into identify qualified business problems. In that terms, I'm not going to give you strategies. I'm not going to give you things that are on paper. I'm actually going to give you very practical tips and advice to make things successful in your machine learning problem identification and deployment. From there on in, you guys probably will have some questions to ask me. For example, okay, whatever you're saying is very good. Have you actually ever done this in any organization? Does any organization do this at this current point in time? Where can we go figure this out? And the answer to that question is yes, we have done it with my personal experience in my own bank. And you know, the good thing about being on the consulting side is you work with a lot of companies. So I have seen all of these methodologies that I'm going to give to you, or practical tips that will help you not only identify your business problems, but they're going to make you successful in terms of deploying them too. So yes, they have been tested. Yes, they have been tried. Yes, they have been successful, and success is probably measured on a very personal scale. So I'm going to start from the top, really. Before identifying a problem, you guys should know how to derive value from data. This has nothing to do with any technical ability that you or I might have. It's a very business-driven question. How do you derive value from data? And I'll put that in 5 buckets for you, either through optimizations of current processes, either getting extra revenue from your existing revenue streams. Third is reducing your current costs. Fourth will be to start altogether a new business stream for the organization based on the data as an asset that they have. And fifth will be cross-selling and upselling. So these are the 5 basic buckets are the goals that you need to achieve in terms of getting value out of data. Getting value and getting goals and getting outcomes are quite different terminologies, and you have to be crystal clear when you actually are addressing problems related to data in that sort of sense. Like I said, if you want to start identifying a problem for machine learning, don't get bogged down with strategy. I mean, everyone has their own strategy. Everyone starts off from a different place in time, and that is in the context of the organization that you're in, as well as the situation of the data that you have. So don't get bogged down how clean your data is, what the data quality is all about. So, I mean, there's a good quote by Teddy Roosevelt, and it goes like, do what you can with what you have, where you are right now. And that's very true for any strategy or any tip for data identification problems. What is the general problem that we face with data right now? And that is the noise and the hype with AI and machine learning and analytics. Generally, in terms of marketing, when they talk about AI, they mean all sort of analytics. So what convolutes the conversation when you go to your stakeholders is stuff like, oh, AI is going to identify the next growth for your corporation. I mean, no, it's not. There's a lot of other factors as well. AI is not the only one. Oh, you know what? $12 billion are going to get invested in AI in the next 5 years. So what? There's a lot of other asset classes and technologies that are also going to get deployed in the next 5 years. So, and if you look at the stats, really, Gartner is one of the sources I will quote here. 84% of all data projects or implementations don't get deployed. That's a big failure rate. And so I don't understand any other project. I don't know of any other project where the stakes are held off against you right from the get-go. So don't get bogged down with too many of the technicalities, because you know what? There's a next problem that you will have. If you don't have the right culture in your organization, no matter how good your machine learning model is, no matter how good your strategies for data, you're not going to survive. So everything about a successful deployment of machine learning, identification of the use case, trust me, has nothing to do with the models. Models are models, they'll get deployed, they'll get their work done. It's everything around it that makes it work, that makes it go. And so there's a famous quote, and you probably must have heard this a lot of time: culture eats strategy. No matter how good your strategy is, no matter how good your model is, if you don't have a culture where AI is actually promoted, you are going to face a lot of problems and a lot of difficulties. And what the practical tip here is, in the organization you're implementing an AI machine learning use case, you need to have an AI champion. That AI champion needs to sit right on the top, and he needs to be championing your AI and machine learning use case. Otherwise, you have no chance of survival. There's a lot of other projects that are going on in the organization. There's a lot of other KPIs that need to get met. No one wants to fall into in a pitfall where they don't even know what's going on. They don't know what the model is doing. They can't rely on the outcome at all. So machine learning, big data, AI is not about the algorithms at the end of the day. And trust me when I say this is my personal experience. No one wants to talk about the algorithms at the end of the day. They want to talk about outcomes. And this is another tip that I'm going to give you, a practical tip. You have to know the difference between outcome and output. You can have the best machine learning AI model that can give you an output, let's say a prediction on some next best offer, a prediction of forecasting on some KPI. But if it's not what the business needs, what's the point of it? Let me give you a very practical example of it. Let's say we can predict a next best offer to a customer that can increase revenues by 10%, right? Okay, we can increase revenues by 10% using that model, and we can give that to the business. But what if the goal of the business is to increase their bottom line, their profitability, and this is getting into a very accountancy sort of world. They need to increase their profitability by 10%. Suddenly, in order to get that, you're not meeting their outcomes. If you give them a 10% uptick on their revenue, that means they need to spend more money, A, on their operations, 2, on their marketing, then on promotions, then on the sales force, then on commissions. By the time you cut the costs across the increased revenue, you might only hit the bottom line by 2%. The outcome is gone. So if you're not going to get that simple evaluation and review done on the outcome, no matter how good your machine learning model is, the business is not going to want to need it. They have the goals, they have the outcomes, and you need to start understanding the outcomes before you do predict anything of any sort. So how do you do this? If you see, now I want to get you guys to look at my slide. Data managers, it's a battle. It is a battle every single day. And you need to be the soldier that needs to fight this battle. But this battle is quite fun, actually. It's not that difficult, if you think about it. And let's just keep it very simple. You don't need to know a lot about data science. You don't need to know about a lot of domain knowledge. You don't need to know about a lot of this and that. You just need to know about your customer. That's pretty much it. Everything falls in place. So how do you identify? The other tip or practical advice that I give you, and then we did this in our bank as well. We had a very use case driven strategy. For the longest time, the 2 years, we never talked about the technology. We never talked about the algorithms. We never talked about data. We talked about use cases, and we worked our way backwards from use cases into the actual algorithm and the data that is required to deliver those use cases. And this is head over heels sort of strategy where you actually need to understand what the outcomes are. So let me give you a very practical example. Any dashboard, and I'm going to throw this question out to the forum, and hopefully I can get the top 3 results and rally back to me. How many dashboards have you seen that actually people see and tell people what to do? How many dashboards actually tell people what to do? Not that many. They will tell you sales are up. They'll tell you costs are down, right? What do they tell you? They probably don't. I mean, if someone is going to answer me, how many dashboards have you actually seen that actually tell people to do the next action? I don't think there are that many. So what the problem really is, in any machine learning problem that you need to identify, you need to understand, like in many industries, in telecom, in food industries such as Food Panda or Uber, or there's something that you call the last mile problem. You need to solve the last mile problem, not the actual big problem. Because to deliver the insight to the user, how they need it, when they need it, in order for them to action it, that's where the play is. That's where the problem is. Not to give them an insight that they might not ever use it ever and can't action it ever. And that's the key to successfully building a use case or qualified machine learning problem. So make sure you do understand this last mile, and that only happens when you understand your user very, very well. So how do you actually do it? It's a very, very collaborative process. You need to sit down with your user and need to listen to what they have to say. And I mean, listen, don't be authoritative with them at all. At this point, you try to listen to their problems. You're not trying to solve any problems. So there's many questions you can ask. Let me give you a couple of practical questions you can ask them. After all said and done, after they're giving you their problems, ask them 2 questions, really. And I want to understand from all the users, from all the people and participants here, how many actually have gone and asked these 2 questions from their users. 1, if I give you a set of analysis, what can you do in the next 30 minutes? What actions can you actually do in the next 30 minutes with the data I'm going to give you via machine learning, reporting, dashboarding, any analytics that you can think of? What action can you take in the next 30 minutes? And the data that I'm giving you, how does it help you save yourself and your team from a disaster or a risk? If your data or information or insight, which I call outcome, don't fall into these buckets, it's useless. It's absolutely useless for them. You're just giving them noise. You're giving them too much data and they will not know what to do. You need to give them one-liner insight actionable, which we call in our organization an actionable insight. They don't need to know what the report says. They need to believe it, first of all, build their trust. That's a whole different stream that you need to take. But they need to know one-liner that they can action in the next 30 minutes. And alhamdulillah, we have done this in our bank practically, where they can pull out a report, see the number, action it within the next 30 minutes or an hour. That's how it is going to go. And that's only when you do understand how to put a problem set, problem use case, or a problem statement together. And so another practical tip that I'll give you in terms of working backwards, what is a problem statement? Problem statement can be broken down into 4 layers: people, finances, systems, and operations. If you don't answer the questions in all of these 4 layers in a problem statement, you're not going to deploy any business use case at all. Trust me, this is where data science is. It's not in the algorithms. I'm telling you that again and again because we've done this over the last 2 years. There are lots of algorithms. They're brilliant. Data can be wrangled, cleaned, and polished. Brilliant. That can be all done. But if you can't hit these 4 categories of a problem statement, because every time you give a solution to an outcome, you better make sure that the business can put it into operations. If it's not practical, it's not going to happen. So what we did in our bank, and it's a practical advice, I took myself and my team and we had a walkthrough through the entire operations. And then we asked ourselves, at which point of the operation can we give our information for the guy at hand to actually utilize it in the best way possible? So we studied it. We studied it inside out. So that's one of the tips I want to give you. Second thing is you need to understand the fears, man. This is something that really does not happen a lot. When you talk about people with AI, AI is going to do this, AI is going to do that. People are fearful. They don't want to lose control of what they're doing. And this is human nature. You're not going to climb on a train that is going 100 miles an hour with there's no one in the front engine at all. So what are you telling them? That's suddenly you're not doing magic. Suddenly that your AI is going to make decisions for them. That's wrong. I mean, you're starting on the wrong foot. No one's going to want that. I don't want that. I do AI big data every day. I don't want that at all. So I'll give you a very practical example. The advice here is make sure you take the user through the journey, and the user should actually drive the solution to the problem. I know you guys will know what the solution is. We all know what the solution is, but let them drive the problem. Let them understand, give them the transparency into the process. At our bank, we're also doing RPAs, which also involves, so we look at it from a very AI perspective. And suddenly we've come across the POC and trying to deploy RPA. And I can tell you this, when we talked about RPA, people thought they were going to lose their job, but right now we're standing where they are not going to lose their job. None of the RPAs we're trying to implement will have them lose their job. They're actually going to shift their roles into a bigger and better role, and the manual stuff are going to get automated. So you need to go out and explain to these managers, to the people who are going to get affected, that there is no need for them to fear job losses. And that's a very practical thing, because if they fear that, they're not going to want your machine learning problem outcomes. Suddenly that problem is not a problem, and it's going to stay there, and it's going to be solved manually through a human. So that needs to get jotted out into. And well, all machine learning use cases, any analytical problem is directed towards either a person or a group of persons. I need to understand these persons and a group of people. So how do you do that? You know what? When people are fearful, they will give you all the requirements under the sun. And this is what you don't want to have. Because what happens is they want to give you all the requirements because they're fearful that if they don't give you any data set that they want later in the day, that then they will be called upon saying, why don't you ask these guys to give you that data set? So instead of focusing on the problems, they try to figure out to get all the set of data from you right from the get-go, and the scope suddenly scatters and smears up. So that's what you need to understand. You need to make sure that the fears are alleviated from the user group. How do you do that? And what we've done in our bank for that is we've implemented self-service BI. So if they want to build their own dashboards, go ahead, build your own dashboard. Don't ask me to build a dashboard. I've given you the entire set of data. You'll get whatever you need whenever you need it to build your own dashboards. So they don't have to be fearful anymore. They know that they can go into the system, they can plug and drag their own attributes and make their own data sets. And this is a very practical advice, because the fear is they're getting one chance at it, and let's ask everything under the sun. So don't make that happen. And that's where things also fall apart, because in your end solution, they will ask for every single solution for the problem. And that somehow doesn't work out at all. And the other fear is, and this has happened in our bank, it's a very practical example where we've given an outcome on a dashboard to a user, and they face that data set as if it was a calculus problem, as if it was a statistical problem. And they basically turn around to us and ask them, so what do we do with all this outcome and the results you gave us? So you know what? Don't push all this data set to a user and surprise them. Please, the word surprise and giving them a whole sort of data set they have never seen is only going to make them fearful, and they're not going to do it, because trust me, they're going to face the fear of looking at it from like you fear doing a calculus problem, like you fear doing a statistical problem. It's not what you want to do. You want to simplify stuff in a very, very narrow KPI for them. I know we get also excited, these data scientists, and want to give them so many outcomes and probabilistic and Bayesian theorems and stuff like that. No, man, that's not what they need. They need a simplified answer, and that's what they need. So please alleviate their fears. The next point, and make sure you identify the authority who's actually signing off on the use case. Most of the times what happens is, in order to get the problem solved, you are actually speaking to the one downs or the second in commands or the business users, but you're actually not understanding who the signing authority is sometimes. And the practical answer to that would be the questions and the problems that the user is actually telling you are probably might not be the actual problem. And that's the biggest thing that as consultants, we actually have figured out. So I'll give you an answer, a practical question to ask these guys, the users that you engage to get the business problem out from. Ask them a question. So how are your KPIs and performance measured? And they probably will give you an answer very quickly because they know what it is. But ask them how your boss's KPIs and performance measured. And most of them will have no clue at all. And that's where you need to go searching for what is the problem actually. So if you don't fulfill the bosses or the high ups whose KPIs or the signatories problem, you're not solving any real problem anyways. You're just doing some window dressing exercise to make things look good. Absolutely nothing at all. So one thing that, again, you need to be very fearful. Let's get onto the technical section of it. Is you know what? Stop using the vocabulary of data science. Stop saying you're going to ensemble things. Stop saying you're going to do bagging. Stop saying you're going to use Bayesian. Stop saying you're going to do C5. They don't understand you. When you do talk about stuff like that, they will not ask you to solve their problems. They will not trust you. Use their language. Use what they use in their daily terms. And you don't come across as you are the guys who are going to solve their problems because you don't know how to do their job. Trust me, you don't know how to do their job. So don't get arrogant in the entire process. So what is the question then in data science and you guys need to answer? And it's the same question that every analytics problem needs to answer. And that is, what do we do now? And that's the only question you need to keep your focus on. A lot of dashboards would tell you the profits have gone up, revenues have gone down, but they actually don't tell you what to do now. And this is where your problem comes out. This is what your problem is. If somebody does not know, or you don't know the outcome, you don't know what to do now, then you don't have a problem. You're not solving anything. So focus on the outcome, not the output. I'm going to repeat this again and again and again, because there's a vast difference between the outcome and the output. So you're going to ask me, how do we then measure what the outcome is? So let me give you a very practical example. You need to understand your stakeholders, and you'll be surprised the guy you're solving the problem for is not the only stakeholder. Let me list you down the stakeholders. The stakeholders can be a regulator. The stakeholder can be a compliance guy. The stakeholder can be internal audit. The stakeholder can be a customer. The stakeholder can be an environmentalist. The stakeholder can be a supplier. it can be an employee. So you don't want to do a machine learning process where compliance is going to come in and shut you down. So you need to understand your regulations. You need to understand your laws and your bylaws. You need to understand your risks around what you're trying to do. If you're going to go in with a narrow mindset, you're never going to deploy stuff. And you need to, again, you need to understand, why this problem hasn't been solved in the years, because there must be a problem with the regulation. There must be a problem with compliance, because we simply can't do it. So why go out solve a problem that you can't even do, we can't even get through compliance? It's not someone's wish list. You have to be very practical with this stuff. So that is something that you need to keep your eyes and ears on. And you need to understand, AI models is not about algorithms. AI models is about people. Don't build the model in isolation. You get people involved in it. Model that does not comply with multiple stakeholders will suddenly fail. And you've created another problem and not solved the problem at all. So I see a lot of AI, and I deal with a lot of issues with AI ethics, with ML ops, auditing AI, UAT. I will ask you a fundamental question here. A lot of the users, a lot of technical experts here. How do you UAT an AI project? I can't explain it to my users. I wish you guys can. Because there's no UAT for a forecast. You have to put it out into the field. That's the answer. I mean, how are you going to UAT a forecast? Because something that hasn't happened can't be UAT'd. So, I mean, I know you're going to give me, oh, you can split your data sets, 70-30, whatever. That's for your training part. Once you're hitting live, there is no training set. What are you going to do now? And that's the practical UAT. And all the users are, they want to do UAT comparing to an old report, or they want to reconcile, they want to check for completeness. How do you solve that problem? No, if you can't do that, they're not going to trust you. They're going to shut you down. So coming to my very end here, if you have any questions or comments, please relay them back to me. Again, like I said, if you let me talk about the people who have actually made it out into the machine learning use case, the leaders. They understand the outcomes, not output, and I've said that across my whole entire conversation. But what about project constraints? Who thinks about project constraints around their machine learning project? The machine learning is like any other project. AI is like any other project. Deep learning is like any other project. I've done millions of projects around, hundreds of projects in my career. So I haven't seen it any different. So if you don't understand the resources, what are project constraints? So I'm going to give you a list. You need to understand the resources. You need to understand the risks. You need to understand the time. You need to understand the costs, the scope, the methodology, and the uses of what you're trying to deploy. You understand what I'm trying to say? Because if you can't deliver it in time, it's useless. Because if you're going to make too much costs out of it, you can't deploy it. Because if you can't understand risks out of it, you can't deploy it. You can't solve that problem if you don't understand your project constraints. And for the love of God, enable people. Don't enable data. This is the only way you're going to make it through any of the problems that you're going to identify and deploy. And there's how do you then make people come on your side? Very practical communication, social engineering problem is data scientists go in there all gun blazing, say, oh, we can probably give you X amount of customers that you can solve this Y, that you can sell this Y product. How about you rephrase and say, look, man, how about this is your KPI to the board. How about we can increase your revenue by X amount by doing this? Let us help you do that. And so they'll certainly come on your side, and they'll be like, yeah, okay, man, come on, tell me what that model does, because I need that extra 10%, 20% revenue to meet my KPI targets. And that's how you bring people on your side, not by telling them, oh, by the way, oh, you don't know how to sell this. Let me tell you how to sell this. That conversation never goes down well at all. So if you don't talk their language from their perspective, it's not going to work. Let me also say something that fails a lot of projects. We throw words such as data driven. Please don't use that word. I mean, I hate that word. In the sense that nothing is data driven. No one likes to be driven. People want to drive their own things. I know that for myself, and it's true for your own selves as well. Please make them data enabled. Please make them, data assisted. Don't say data driven, because they're not going to like it. They don't, and no one wants to come into their department and start driving their business for them. That is absolutely wrong. It's a wrong language, it's a wrong approach, and they're not going to like you at all. It has happened. We faced it, we solved it, we resolved it. So, and like I said, unless you don't align their interests with you and the problem, it's not going to happen. And so I don't know how much time I have on this, but I think I've consumed much of the time that was probably allocated to me. Is that you take your users along the journey, align the interests, tell them what the goals are, but more importantly, with machine learning and AI, please tell them that nothing is going to go wrong. Identify the guardrails that you have in your model, that it's not going to spew out an inconsistent outcome. Please tell them what barriers or protection that you've put in your model, that data drift is not going to happen, for the lack of a better word, that they and you and all, there'll be someone looking at the models in compliance, in audit, for that outcome not to go wrong suddenly at a certain period of time. They need to know that someone's actually protecting the outcome, that it's not running willy-nilly just like that automatically, because no one actually likes that at all. So please align their interests and their goals. And last but not the least, when you're going and identifying a problem, I've come across a lot of students that come to me. I've got a lot of business users that come across to me, a lot of vendors that come across to me, identifying problems. If a problem can be solved through a simple report, don't do machine learning. 60 to 70% of your problems are going to be solved through a report, not through machine learning. Forget deep learning at all. Having said that, we have successfully, alhamdulillah, deployed machine learning in our organization, but it only solves a few high-end problems. It doesn't solve big problems, and it doesn't need to solve big problems. So that would be my practical tips for you guys, data managers out there who are battling it every day, battling every single day in order to be successful in deploying data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence. And I leave you with this: it's not about the algorithms at all. Thank you so much. If you guys, the moderator, wants to relay some questions or comments, I'll take that right now, and we'll wrap it up from there.
Thank you so much, Jawad. It was a very thought-provoking session, and we actually not just learned what are the qualified business problems, but instead you also told how to pitch those business problems in the right way, and not to be arrogant, but be a friend to them and solve the business problems. Once again, thankful for your time. And now we will go to the questions. I'll be picking some of the questions that I find very interesting into. Just give me a while.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I hope it could have been more interactive, because at the end of the day, I'm happy solving problems for people.
Okay. So one of the question is like, how much is the storytelling into the solving the whole data science problem, and particularly to what Meezan Bank does? What kind of team do you constitute of?
Okay, storytelling, or the other way, which I was always talking about, speak the business's language, is very, very important. So when we got our use cases signed off by the IT steering committee, which involves the C-suites and a lot of group heads, we were never talked about our data science. We never talked about our machine learning. We actually told them what the problem is. We actually calculated our ROI. We actually told them the timelines that's going to be solved in. We told them the risks, and we told them the mitigation factors. And we told them how all of this is actually going to benefit the KPIs that we were actually trying to identify that would get improved. So yes, storytelling, communication is 80% of the job. So you can't hide behind, you can't hide away from that for sure. What do we do in Meezan Bank? Well, we have a set of data science or big data team. I lead two verticals, data scientists in my vertical and business analysts, for lack of a better word. There are actually business solvers solving problems. Another guy who sits with me, he's ex-KPMG London, and he understands a lot of business problems. And so the data science team, my sister teams comprise of data engineers who look after our lake and our warehouse and ETLs, and my MLOps team, who's in the formation. We're making that happen right now because it's the start of a new greenfield project. So MLOps comes right at the end. And then we are supported by a very good project management office, and we have installed about 18 or so data champions throughout the organization. We try to gel them together with events such as data super leagues, etc. So if you talk about my team, it actually is where we're top of the waterfall. It's where the use cases come out from, get approved and get deployed. And then we have a bunch of data scientists and business domain experts in my team. But we have a wider team, so that also is part of our team. And we have a bunch of people who do just BI dashboarding. So that's my team.
Okay, sounds good. Sounds very comprehensive and a very uh, delightful manner that people can follow your team structure and build their own companies and organizations around. And I see less of questions and a lot of praises for your good sessions and being a knowledgeable, very on site from the real world. So again, thankful Jawad that you joined us and we had a wonderful session with you.
Thank you so much. Pleasure being here, and hopefully I can impart some of my knowledge and practical expertise, and hopefully it hasn't been too strategic and more practical. Thank you so much.
Thank you. You're most welcome. Let's move on to